Hey everyone, happy National Trails Day. I'm Dana Peterson, the Stewardship Coordinator at Friends of Acadia, and I'm sorry that we missed you all for National Trails Day, but I've got Gary Stelflug and Chris Barter here from the Acadia National Park Trail Crew, and we're going to show you the Seaside Path today so that we can all celebrate National Trails Day safely.
Hi, I'm Chris. Chris Barter. I'm a trail crew supervisor. I've worked at Acadia since 1989, and Gary's my boss. Dana just introduced him, and basically he and I cooked up a scheme years ago, around the year 2000, when we started this whole big trail rehab project to rehabilitate the Seaside Path. I mean, many other schemes were cooked up as well, but this was definitely one near and dear to our hearts right from the beginning. It's such an important trail, and it has so much great history, and it's a trail that no one knows exactly the first time that it was put in. It was probably put in as a bushwhack sometime in the 1800s, but by 1893 it shows up on the Rand map, which is sort of the first definitive trail map that we have, and it went from the Seaside Inn in Seal Harbor up to the Jordan Pond House. So it connected two really important historic landmarks here at Acadia. The Jordan Pond House, of course, burned down in the 70s and was rebuilt, and the Seaside Inn actually burned down and was rebuilt as well, and then was torn down. So that suffered a couple different fates and is now gone. There's a beautiful field there now at the other end. And of course, it wasn't just for that reason. It was also as part of our mission to establish connector trails from the towns into the park to really encourage people to explore the park on foot and to leave from wherever they're staying, wherever they live, and to just walk into the park, to cut down on vehicle traffic, and also just to have this wonderful experience of leaving from your own home or the inn where you're staying, walk directly from where you get up in the morning into the park, and it really is a truly different way to experience things. So there's so much I could talk about, and I'll just start by, as a crew supervisor, talking a little bit about the work. I'm standing here on a nearly completed section of trail, so you can see kind of how we lay things out and what it looks like when we're done, or in this case almost done, which is, you see all these stakes along the side. So these are all set at exactly 4 feet apart. This trail was one that was built like that. By the time it was made into the kind of walking path that we associate with the significant historic period, so by the 20s, this was a path that had nice smooth gravel on it the whole way, which is about 2 miles, and it was really set up so that people in their formal clothes, people not necessarily going out for a rugged hike, could walk from the inn, could go up and get some tea at the tea house and walk back, or go wherever they were going from there on foot. So it was made to be a nice, easy stroll through the woods rather than the kind of rugged hike that some of our other trails provide. And so when we're rehabilitating it, that's one of our number one priorities, is to not just bring back that ease so that people will be encouraged to use it, but also the look and feel of that historic character of the trail. So it had this nice even width, and we'll see some older trail that we haven't rehabilitated yet, and you can see the clues to that up ahead. So that's basically what we do. We first come in, and at the other end we'll see where we've got it torn up and we started the work. Here we're almost done. We come in, we excavate wide enough to do all the work we need to do, then I come along and put in these stakes, and as I said, on this trail they're 4 feet apart, both sides of the trail, and then you see this grade line here, and this is going to be the height of the finished gravel. When I put this in, most of this was sitting about a foot off the ground. The string was just a foot off the ground. Then we bring in blown ledge, which is just like blasted up rock, because it's really durable and really strong, and also allows some percolating drainage underneath. That's the first layer that goes in, and then on top of that we put the gravel, which you see here. Now on this trail, this gravel is a nice pink color, which is basically the color of the natural gravel here at Acadia, because it's decayed rock, Cadillac pink granite. It's a very signature look. You just saw that bridge behind us. That was also locally quarried stone. So this is gravel that's made from local stone, so it'll blend in with the environment. more than say the gray that's on the carriage roads. And there are many reasons for using the gray, and there are good ones. But for this trail, we decided to use the pink gravel. We had some help from the Land and Garden Preserve early on. They had a source for this gravel and donated a lot of it to us so that we could use it. And now we're using their source and buying our own now. But that's what we're using for the surface. I think it looks really beautiful, and you can see this was put in last year, and it's already starting to weather in. There's leaves and sticks on the trail, and over the years, because the trail's built right, I'm going to say, it's going to weather in, and it won't wash out from the water. This surface will stay stable, and it will just become more and more naturalized and look more and more like a part of the natural woods here. And I also want to give a shout out to the volunteer crew for this section. Dana and his workers did a lot of this finished work. Planting, this is all actually planted revegetation on the side of the trail. You can see, you know, these nice tufts of moss and everything that were all put down along the edge of the trail to naturalize it. They put down the gravel, raked it out, tamped it, and made it look really good. So this whole project has been a big cooperative effort between the Acadia Trails crew, the Youth Conservation Corps, the Friends of Acadia volunteers, and we've also had some people from the Appalachian Mountain Club working out here with us as well. So it's a huge job. There are a lot of stages to it, and we've had a lot of different groups contributing at those different times. So I'm standing here next to this boundary marker here to talk about the fact that this project is not just a collaboration of different work groups working together, but it's also a collaboration between nonprofit entities over whose land the trail runs. So about half of this trail is on Park Service land, and almost half of it is on the Land and Garden Preserve land, which is of course made from parcels that were owned by John D. Rockefeller Jr., passed down through the family, and were recently bundled into this preserve that is also dedicated to the mission of keeping historical work beautiful and allowing visitors to come use their land in appropriate ways. And we're actually, that section I just showed you is on their land. And this boundary right here, it's 20 feet off, and this is where it's Park Service land. Because it's located right near both boundaries, the trail kind of goes back and forth between the two, and it even crosses a couple of private properties, and we got permission from their landowners as well to restore the trail, and we're really very grateful for that. So I'm standing here on a section that we have not finished yet. There's only a little bit left to do, but this is part of it here, so you guys can kind of get a sense of what the trail looked like before we started. And this is actually one of the better looking sections in terms of what the trail looked like before we started, but since it's one of the few left, we stopped here. One thing I'll point out is right where I'm standing, it's been a very dry spring, and this is still like deep mud right here. There were places on this trail where the few people who were still using it had to get outside the trail and walk along the side of it for long stretches because it was so wet, and especially after it rained, there'd be 6 inches of water in the trail. So this is kind of what it looked like. But another cool thing about this is you can see the ghost of what it was, and really part of what we do when we're rehabilitating an old trail is we kind of collect clues for how it was built, and sometimes we have pictures. We did have a couple of photographs of this trail, but then along every stretch of the trail we kind of look for all the remnants of what's left of the old trail, so that when we put it back it will be as close as possible to the way it was when it was done, hopefully with a few modifications that will make it last even better. And here you can see that the old builders had actually, because this was wet, built this part up a little bit and had a little drainage here. Like this is really the ghost of an old drain along the side, a ditch here, like what you saw that we were doing earlier. And I'm guessing that there's a culvert under here. When we dig for this, because this is a place where we'll put a culvert, it's the lowest part of the wet section here. I bet you anything we're going to find one of those old clay pipes underneath this mud. That's what we've been finding all along. But you can kind of see the width. You see where the edges of the trail were, and kind of what it looked like. And I'll admit there's something really kind of nice and rustic about this really old section of trail. The unfortunate part is it's really hard to walk on. So we're going to bring this back, and when we're done, we'll try to preserve all that nice rusticness of the moss on the side, the old ditches, obviously the old corridor and exactly the kinds of curves which were wonderful that this trail had in it. But instead of mud in the middle, it'll have that nice pink gravel surface. So this is another interesting vestige of old work here that we stopped at. You can see along the side here in a number of places the old builders lined the trail with stones. And in between, you got the old trail tread was here, the ditch was here, and there's a line of stones. And looking back up behind me, you can kind of see that on this stretch disappearing out of sight. They're all covered with moss now. We're doing our best to preserve as much of this as we can. It's one of the real challenges of the rehabilitation work that we're doing, to preserve as much of the old work as we can, because in order to make the drainage right here, we will have to build the tread up somewhat, which means that some of these stones are getting buried in places, but we're finding a lot of signature places with the nicest rows of stones to make sure that we lay the trail out so that when we get done, you can still see them and see that aspect of the old construction work. This part of the trail, the way it is right now, shows us what's underneath most of the trail when it's finished. This is the first layer of material that we bring in. It's called blown ledge because it's literally blasted out of the ledge side. It's blasted rock. It's good for a couple of reasons. One is it's very firm, and it also, the way that it piles up, because it's just rock, it allows percolation drainage through, so that lower level will allow the water to kind of do a certain amount of running underneath the tread. We never count on that completely. We always have the drainage dips and culverts and ditches wherever it's wet, but it does help quite a bit. And the other reason it's so good is because when you blast rock, it comes out in angular shapes. And those angular shapes literally lock together like puzzle pieces on their own when you put them into the trail and compact it. So what we've got underneath is basically all of these interlocking pieces that will stay together for many, many years to come. This is one element that the original construction did not have. And we think it's a really important addition. It's one that's hidden. It won't change the look. It will still look just the way the old trail did, but it will have all of this angular base rock underneath, which is going to keep everything glued together. We've used a lot of this stuff. To say we've used a ton of this stuff would be a huge understatement. We've actually brought in, probably, off the top of my head, I have to look at my notes, I'm going to say maybe 2,000 yards of this material. You think about it, a medium-sized dump truck holds 7 or 8 yards. So we're talking about, hundreds of dump trucks of this blown. Now, it's a 2-mile-long trail. That's a huge effort, and it's a lot of those Canicom loads going back and forth. But I just want to reiterate, we're hoping this is a job that only has to be done once, that 100 years from now, a crew like ours doesn't have to come back and do this level of work that we're doing now. We're really trying to build it to last, and this is a big part of making that happen. So I said before that we're going to end up using probably about 2,000 yards of blown ledge. This pile right here, this is a pile that we brought in last fall from the road and left here, so we're going to pick it up and move it again farther out into the woods. This is about 60 yards. It kind of gives you an idea how much material we're talking about. So whatever kind of trail work you're doing, whether it's a historic rehab or you're building a new trail, whether it's a rough trail or a smooth trail, drainage is always your primary concern, because if you don't take care of what the water's doing, you're going to lose your work. And the people who originally built this trail, they understood that as well. So there were some old drainages on this trail. Of course, they hadn't been maintained for probably 70 or 80 years. The last record we have of anybody doing work on this trail before we started this rehab was 1951. And shortly after that, the trail was abandoned and disappeared off of all the maps, and then water kind of had its way with it. So when we got to it, it was mostly just, in a lot of places, just a rut through the woods where the water gets into the path that was the trail and just follows that as if it were a stream bed. So we really had to think hard about how we're going to take care of the drainage here, especially in a place like this where there's a lot of water coming through this draw behind me. And this place had completely washed out. But we had the ghosts of some old drainage in here as we did all along this trail. And what they had used was old, what's called vitrified clay pipes, which if you've ever seen like a really old septic system or something like that, it's just like this brown clay. And those aren't really made anymore. They're not really used for anything. They don't work as well as some of the modern things we have. So our challenge was to like use contemporary products and do something that's going to last better and maybe work a little better than what they had, but make it look like the old trail. So the most important part of that was that they had culverts under the trail and that they had stone headers at either end of the culvert. This is what I mean by stone header. So it's basically just a stone framework that's built around the ends of the pipe, and they have both an aesthetic and a functional aspect. What they do functionally, of course, is you could see here the pipe is there, these walls on either side, and then this stone on top. They keep the trail together, right? Because these top stones act kind of like a wall to keep the gravel from coming off and keep everything from slumping out. They also weight down the pipe because whenever you got wet ground, you get frost, right? Ice expands, it pushes things up out of the ground, but this weight of these rocks here will keep these pipes in place. And then as far as aesthetically, we're using pink granite and for both the sides and the top, and we're building them essentially in the old classic style of a pipe culvert header. I mentioned the vitrified clay pipes. This is a piece that we dug out of one of those old culverts. You can see it's got this kind of bell end on it, and they fit together in pieces. It was a technique used, God, I don't know when they started, probably in the 1800s, and by the 1950s they were done using this stuff. Here's one of the reasons. This is what happens to it. It is actually a very fragile material. And it doesn't take much to crack these. So almost all the ones we've taken out of the ground have already been broken. So we're stopping here because I thought this was an interesting place to talk just a little bit in very much layman's terms about the geological history of this place where the trail is. And it's not totally unrelated to the trail being here and why the trail is the way that it is. In this section here, we actually were able to build from me, like back out of sight, without having to bring anything in. In fact, I had a group of volunteers from the Appalachian Mountain Club working in here. And the way that we built this part of the trail was, it's pretty simply, we call it a ditch and fill. They come along, dig out the ditch on one side. It's always on the side from which the water is coming. So you catch the water before it gets to the trail. Remembering that thing about how important drainage is so we don't lose our gravel. Catch the water in the ditch, and then it will flow across these dips, the depressions in the trail. But once the material comes out of the ditch, then that is used to actually fill in the treadway itself. And it's a little bit of a process. You have to kind of separate out the bigger rocks and put them at the bottom, and then take the finer gravel and put that on as the top course. They did a really nice job here. They also saved all the moss like Dana was talking about, and you can see along this side and the other side, they used the moss to revegetate the sides, which not only naturalizes the look of it, but it actually has a function as well, which is that as those mats grow together, they become essentially just like a stone wall. They become the container that holds the gravel in place over the years. And the reason we have such nice gravel here is that this is basically an extension of the glacial moraine that makes Jordan Pond. The south end of Jordan Pond is a glacial moraine, which is a place where the glaciers essentially deposited a huge, they're pushing stuff down with them the whole time they came down from the north, and it's in places where they left, deposited these huge piles of gravel, I believe as they receded. And where those big piles of gravel are laid across a rock ravine like there is underneath Jordan Pond, basically just dammed up all the water and made that pond. And that pond is actually 157 feet deep. And it's, if you were to explore underneath, what you'd see is a landscape that looks very much like the cliffs going up Penobscot and Pematic Mountain, just underwater. It's a pretty cool idea. And that same gravel was pushed all the way down this path And I think it was probably one reason that this was such a nice gravel path to begin with. And we're going to stop a little bit later on and look at where the old builders got their gravel. But essentially the way they got it was to go off into the woods and dig a big hole in the ground, we call borrow pits, and take the gravel out of there to put down in the path. And they had to do that to keep this trail nice. They probably had people out here just about every year putting down new gravel. Our goal is to make our drainages bigger and maybe a little bit better designed so that we put the gravel down once and it stays there. I mentioned earlier that the old builders got their material out of the woods by digging holes in the ground, taking the gravel and rocks out of those holes, and then transporting that by hand up to build the trail. And I'm standing in one of those holes right here. These are kind of cool little testaments to history that are actually, if you start looking, they're all along this path. And how numerous they are and how big they are gives you an idea of how much material has gone onto this path, and in many cases then left the path as water washed it away over the years. This one that I'm in is probably, at one point it was probably 2 to 3 feet deep. It's maybe 20 feet long. You know, they might have gotten 10 yards of gravel out of here. And it's kind of cool. It's just kind of cool to see these. And once you know what they are, I think it adds to the experience of hiking the trail and kind of being in touch with the process that built it. So one of the things that we do on Trail Crew today is we use a lot of modern tools and modern equipment in order to recreate the old styles of work. It's just, things just aren't done anymore the way that they were done 100 years ago, 120 years ago, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is there just aren't as many, these huge labor groups out there being funded by very rich people. You know, it may have taken hundreds of people to build this trail. Certainly we know that in the time of the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, that there were 200 people living in each of 2 different camps, going out working on these huge trail projects. And we have to try to rehabilitate those same trails with a group that ranges between maybe 12 and 20 people. Don't get me wrong, we're really happy to have those numbers that we do, and we're one of the best staffed trail crews in the country. And we're very happy about that. We're very proud of the work that we do. But in order to do this kind of work, we use modern tools. It wouldn't make sense not to do so. But we try to get the old work in the end by using those tools. And this is one of them. So this, for moving gravel and stuff around, 100 years ago, they would have had wheelbarrows or buckets, and like I was saying, they would have hand dug these pits in the woods, and then a whole bunch of people would have just carried them down by hand. And it probably would have taken, you know, a week to build 10 feet of trail. Well, now we got stuff like this. This is the brand name is a Canicom, and it's just a crawler track cart. It's got a gas motor. It drives these tracks underneath. Tracks are much better for getting traction over roots and rough terrain than wheels are. And then it has a little hydraulic pump, and I'm going to start it in a second, but of course I have to talk first. When you just hit this lever here, it just operates the dump, and you can dump the material out of it. And this is how we bring in the blown ledge, gravel. We bring in a lot of the re-veg, anything heavy we can use these for. I'm going to start it up and demonstrate. So this is the dump. As easy as that.
So as Chris was talking about earlier, a really important part of this project and a lot of trail projects is the rehab afterwards. And a big part of that is revegetating the side of the trails, which you know, is pretty bare after all the construction work is done. And what we want to do is make sure that you know, we populate that with native plants, you know, plants that fit the environment, and not simply just leaving it for weeds to take over, you know, within the next year or so. So what we do is we use every part of the trail. So as we're cutting away the bank to even out the tread, or, you know, digging out an area to put blown ledge or gravel, what we're doing is saving saving the sods, which is this organic material with roots holding it together and things like that. And what we'll do after we're done with trail construction is lay it back on the side so that this really nice moss and native vegetation will come back and really blend the trail in. So we use these sods much like that trail section we saw before, where you saw these vegetative mats that were taken during the prep process and replanted on the side of the trail.
We looked earlier at places along the trail where we had moss that we had dug out in order to put the trail down, or we had taken some maybe from nearby and planted that back at the edge of the trail. This is another example of ways that we have of stabilizing the sides of the trail, revegetating the environment, and making sure that everything stays put and that nature is put back to rights. And this is simply a native grass and clover seed that we put down at the side. We put down topsoil, we seeded it with that, and we put this mat down over the seed, which keeps everything from eroding and keeps everything in place while it grows back. One reason that we use grass in this place is because we have a little bit more sunlight. Grasses require sunlight. Moss tends to go, of course, in shadier spots, north sides of trees and all that. You can't really tell today because it's a foggy day, but there's a lot more sunlight here. And I noticed also that there are some tufts of grass growing in this area, so it seemed like it would be an appropriate way to renaturalize this part of the trail.
Well, Chris, we're at the Edward Lothrop Rand plaque along the Seaside Trail. We're outside of the park, and there's a lot of plaques throughout the park and outside that are dedicated to the people that donated a lot and worked a lot with early Acadia and the trails and such. This one's kind of interesting because a lot of people assume that Rand, who was also a map maker, might be related to McNally Rand and all those maps, but he wasn't related to them at all. He's I don't know if he was a founding member. Do you know whether he's a founding member of the Champlain Society?
I would just guess that he was. And
Yeah,
the Champlain Society was a group of Harvard students, essentially, who had connections to Mount Desert Island in the 1890s. This group of young men formed a society they called the Champlain Society, with the express goal of documenting the flora and fauna of MDI, mapping MDI, and eventually that quickly morphed into a mission of preserving much of the land. And so they were really kind of the first step towards having a national park. George Dorr was not a member, but he worked closely with many of the members of the Champlain Society as time went on to form the park. And you'll see plaques that memorialize other members like Charles Elliott around in the park.
The plaque to Rand is dedicated to his making known the flora of Mount Desert and the wonderful trail maps that he's given, and we've been able to study throughout the past 100 years. We are maintaining some of the park plaques. We're putting protective wax on them, and through generous donations, Friends of Acadia, and government funding too. That'll be the last 5 years of doing that is the first they've been done in 50 and 60 years. So that's really a great thing. We're kind of ending here, and I was thinking that one of the things that I would add to everything that Chris has said is that it's like a compilation of history here, that we've got folks like Rand, the original people that hiked Acadia and Mount Desert, and then we've got the folks that built this path, and now we're going into our present Park Service and volunteer crews. And as Chris said too, we're going to continue this all the way. Hopefully this will last with us for many, many years to come. Not just that history coming together, but as Chris mentioned too, the volunteer groups, Land and Garden Preserve, Friends of Acadia, Park Service. Again, they're all collaborations of time and history and people that are going to give us a wonderful path here when we're all done.
Thank you for joining us on our guided hike over the Seaside Path. Thanks to Gary and Chris for coming out and giving us a glimpse of their deep base of knowledge about the trail system in Acadia. And thanks to Julia and Ashley for coming out and helping us document this. And as the stewardship coordinator with Friends of Acadia, I just would like to thank the volunteers that worked on this. And even though we're not out there volunteering right now, I hope that we'll get a lot more volunteers coming out once everything reopens and we're able to get out and do work.
I really enjoyed talking about building this trail today. It's been a real pleasure for me to be able to talk about what we do and to kind of remember all of the different groups that have been a part of this project and all of the other people and entities who have contributed to making this happen over the last few years. We hope that the trail is going to be ready very soon. I've learned not to give exact dates. You never know what's going to happen, but hopefully very soon this trail is going to be completely open. And I really hope that if you've been interested in this video that you come out and hike it. There's something very special about this trail, as there are about so many trails in Acadia. Each one seems to have its own particular feel to it, and this one certainly has its own very unique character. It's just a lovely walk, and hopefully after watching this video you'll have a sense for all the history and all the work that's gone into it. Maybe appreciate it even more.
Yeah, and I certainly want to chime in thanking Dana and his volunteers for the work they've done, but also for Chris for doggedly pursuing this to its finish. It's been a multi-year project, and he's worked it masterfully. And I also really need to put the plug into FOA, because this trail hasn't been entirely funded by Friends of Acadia and its donors.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to be a valuable gift for many, many years to come. And I've certainly have enjoyed this too, you guys. It's been great to be here. And I hope we can see you guys next Trails Day in person.